legend of the silent movie industry, but silent movies are something that are coming very much to the forefront in this country now. People are realizing that the present day cinema lacks something. You made people laugh right through the 20s, through depressions, through so many historical moments in American history and British history, of course. Let's talk about making people laugh. Let's start at the beginning. How did you start in movies? Can I ask you that as a first question?
I was playing in the theater, of course. I started when I was about 12 years old. In fact, I did everything in the theater, from usher, candy butcher, property man, assistant stage manager. I went on through the whole gamut, and then I started in pictures as an extra. Hal Roach and I met in pictures, both of us playing extra. Not that we didn't have a great deal of, I had a great deal of experience myself from the theater, but never.
In the theatre at that time,
Yeah.
were you in vaudeville?
No, I never played vaudeville. I played stock companies and little road shows and all that kind. But all this gave you tremendous experience, and it wasn't till I'd say, well, in fact, where I'm speaking of goes clear back to when I went and played in the first movie. I think was somewhere around about 1912 or somewhere way back in there. Seems a long ways back, doesn't it?
But a wonderful time.
Yeah.
At that time, what were movie sets like? You know, we're used to seeing behind the scenes in Hollywood now and seeing tremendous sets. What were they like in 1912?
Well, you see, that was long before lights. We had lights. And in fact, our studios never had roofs over them. They just had fences around them. And we had the different groups, they had their own place for their stages, and they just had canvases, tarpaulins on wires, diffusers they called them, and when they'd have interiors and they'd have to keep a soft light over all, they'd pull the diffusers over. But everything was taken in outdoor lighting, and I remember the first time they brought in lights. I heard they were using lights back east. They used them back before we did, and we said, "My God, they're making pictures with lights." And when they brought them into us, they didn't have the proper coverage over these Klieg lights, and with the carbons in them, and consequently, this carbon dust came all out into the air, and it got into everybody's eyes. And they called them Klieg eyes. It was just like somebody throwing a handful of sand into your eyes. And of course, for a couple of days, we just wasn't able to work. Oh, your eyes were red and everything like that. But that period, of course, goes a way back.
But a great period for comedy. And what about comedy? How did you approach each film? You were making so many. I mean, you made, 300 films. This is a colossal number. Each film must have been approached in an individual way.
Well, now, when I count that number of films, I'm including one-reelers. And I go back to characters, well, two main characters that I played. One was called Willie Work, and he had very broad shoulders and a Prince Albert coat and a little plug hat and a kind of a cat mustache. And I did a number of pictures with him. Then I made a series of pictures with a character called Lonesome Luke. And Lonesome Luke had very tight clothes. All of them had big shoes. Generally, you put them on the wrong feet. And with Lonesome Luke, I tried to keep him individual, but he was like all the rest of them. All of us, we had grotesque costumes, and they were mostly all, it was slapstick, I would say, predominated. Now in the later ones, while all of them, even our features, are interwoven with slapstick, still they're so intermixed with many blends of comedy, like broad comedy and light comedy, farce comedy, a touch of dramatic comedy, and they're all blended in. It's erroneous to call them slapstick comedies now, like the one that we played last night, The Kid Brother. That's anything but a slapstick comedy. Or to call Chaplin's Gold Rush, that's not a slapstick comedy. It has lots of slapstick in it, I'm happy to say, because it takes it out of the genteel stage and keeps it into the quality that we had lots of fun in the early days. But the early ones that we're talking about, they were just pure slapstick and have fun, and you took. In fact, I think we took so many falls in them. In fact, you'd fall about every third scene, I guess. And I think they called me when I was playing Luke. They called me the India rubber ball. I guess because I'd fall and bounce back up again or something. I don't take too much time on this particular subject.
You take as long as you want. When you were making the one-reelers, did each one have a lengthy script, or did you work from just a very brief outline of the story?
That's a good question. We never used any scripts. And here, you did ask this question. I didn't answer it. We did the one-reelers. We generally took about a week. Although we could make them in 5 days, we made one in a day and a half. It was in a kind of a sanitarium, a mudatorium. And there, the opportunities for to do business and get gags, little comedy ideas were really opulent as could be. And so we just flowed through and we finished in a day and a half. And now, back in those days, as I say, we didn't use scripts. We just kind of made it up as we went along. In fact, the real early days, we'd sometimes just get a group of characters. We'd go out into a park, and we'd shoot a picture in a park. Maybe there was somebody that I'd get into an altercation with, and that started off the whole thing. I'd flirt with somebody's girl, and her beau came along, the great big fellow always, you see, and that started off everything, and we'd go so far and probably end up with about the last third of it, a chase or something around this park or something.
Yes, now always a chase.
No, we had different. You can say there's a chase, there's a fight, there's a scare, there's a thrill, like in one of our best pictures, a football game, all of them what we call big finishing sequences. But in the features, generally, you'd have, well, now like in The Freshman, I have 3 large sequences in that. We have the football game. We have a sequence where I go to a party. I'm the host, but I've only had time to have my suit basted, and of course it keeps coming apart. And then we had the football practice. Now those are 3 large sequences. In between that we have little sequences and so forth. Funny thing is that when you're talking about not using scripts, we didn't use scripts until I started making talking pictures. And some of them would allow you to do it one way and the other. Now for instance, Safety Last, we made the climb first. We didn't know what the beginning of the picture was going to be. We had an outline. We knew why we were going to climb. We had that worked out. Purely in synopsis form, though. It was very changeable, and we did. So we made that. Then we went back and figured out what's the best way to start this, and we did. Now, we tried the same thing in The Freshman. Now, The Freshman's a character comedy. Safety Last is just a gag, thrill comedies. Breezy, lots of gags, the Safety Last. But in Freshman's got a little more depth to it. And very simple theme. Boy wants to go to college, wants to be the most popular boy, and he gets the wrong, erroneous idea on how to do it, so you know he's going to be in a great deal of trouble, and he was. But it's a character comedy, and we tried to do the football game first, the same as we had in the other one. It didn't work. We worked about two weeks, worked out to the Rose Bowl, and we had that big out there, and we came back and finally threw it off, threw the material away. We never used any of it, and started from the beginning. Now that's what you do. You can't tell. You have to do one way and another one. But in making pictures, we'd generally go out and we'd have, maybe on the set, we'd have a certain number of pieces of business. I hate to call them gags. I don't know what they'll know what I'm talking about. They think you're stopping somebody from talking. But we'd have a certain number of them, and then we'd do it that way. And then something else would suggest itself, some little prop that's around there, something that I did during the scene, and they said, we do that next time. Now we may take it 5 or 6 times. When we finally get to the 6th take, maybe we're doing practically nothing that we did in the first take. That doesn't mean that the first take might not be the one we'd choose. It's one it might have more spontaneity than the others. So, but you built it as you went along, and you had to be pretty good at ad-libbing. as well as knowing how to time and space. That's very important.
Well, let's talk about time and space. One of your specialities seemed to be hanging from very, very high rooftops, and you had some awful near misses. I've got to ask you this question, Harold. How dangerous was it doing this sort of stunt work?
Well, it was very dangerous. Of course, it wasn't as dangerous as it looks because I did have some protection. We built platforms below that you don't see, and we piled those with mattresses. They were a long ways down, from 12, 15, sometimes almost 20 feet. We put them. That's a long ways down when you measure it off. And you got to be careful because in order to miss these platforms, we couldn't put railings around them. That made us put it even farther down, so you couldn't take a chance. If you fall there, you fall flat on the mattresses. Don't stand up. You could bounce off of them. So they were dangerous to do. In fact, when I only did 5 of them out of all this numerous pictures I made, only 5 really up on buildings. But I guess they had such an impact, they've kind of remained in people's minds. But the first 2 days I'd go up there, I had to get conditioned. Just like anybody goes over and looks over the edge of a building, you know, almost they get that thrill that, oh boy, they just back right away. They get a feeling almost they want to jump. Well, you get that when you first start on one of these. So first 2 days were really wasted. You did very little, and you were so careful. But after that, as you went on, it took us sometimes well over a month to make one of these sequences because we could only work between about 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock. Otherwise, shadows would come into the street, and then they wouldn't match the other scenes. But after you're up there a while, you got overconfident. It really wasn't good. You had to be careful because then you felt so sure of yourself. You'd go out where there was no platforms at all, and that wasn't necessary because we always used platforms somewhere below us. Except we wouldn't have platforms where we made long distances. There we were actually on the real building without platforms. We had wires on us with the harness underneath with wire, and we had to do that kind of stuff. But the city wouldn't let us do it. Of course, we had to talk the city in pretty carefully. They wouldn't let you do it today. I don't think you'd do it today. And of course, everybody used process today, and that's the reason it's hard to get people to believe that these were not process. So we more or less put a little title in there saying that this is as high as you see it. The people are underneath it when we're shooting them, and then we get the reaction. If we don't, they don't pay. They think, oh, it's just a little off the ground. And that spoils it. So in the old days we made it, we'd get waves of screams, and then they'd laugh. Well, you don't quite get that solid type of scream today. You get it. You get it if you tell them you're up there. But if you don't tell them you're up there, they just sit there and accept it as a few feet off the ground.
Harold, you were a contemporary of Chaplin, Laurel and Hardy, Fatty Arbuckle, many others. Did you work together at all with any of these people? Did you tend to mix with them?
Well, now I mixed with them. We're all very good friends. In fact, we all used to gather, a great many of us, over to Doug Fairbanks Sr.'s dressing room at the United Artists. He had a steam room there. We all used to go over there and take steams. And when I say that, it would be Buster Keaton, and there'd be Charlie, Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, a whole group like it. We'd always spread, and we'd all go there and tell each other what they should be doing. Of course, then we'd listen and go off and do it exactly the way we intended to do it to start with. But we were very good friends. We each one had our own individual idea of what we should do, and I guess we all pinched a little from the other fella, but we didn't do it in a plagiarizing way because we did it in a way that we changed our ideas around. We put originality to it, so it really became a new idea. Today, you see around, they use it exactly as you did it, and they don't try to use that inventiveness that they could take the basic idea.
Yeah, now the inventiveness. The camera was something that you used in the silent days, it seems to me. You did a lot of trick photography that was really very funny. But as an artist, did you have anything to do with this trick photography? Did you say to a director, I suggest it be done this way?
Everything. I controlled it completely. They didn't lift their little finger unless they came to you and wanted to know how you would do this and how you wanted them to do it. I had very excellent gag men. That's writers. They didn't write anything. They thought up ideas, but we never used their ideas as a rule the way they thought they brought them to you. We changed them around, and everybody worked. And we'd have sometimes as many as 3 up to 7 or 8 of these writers. Paid quite a bit of money for some of them, around $800 back in those days. That's a lot of money.
And they just thought up funny sequences, ideas.
Yes, because we had no scripts. They didn't have any scripts to write. We had what we called the gag room, and they would throw their ideas at me in the morning when I'd go in there. And so we'd put them together and figure what we wanted and what would work, or I'd give them an idea to work on, maybe idea of getting a magician's coat on by mistake. Now, what are all the things going to happen in there? Break them up in singles sometimes in groups. Sometimes we'd all work together. And with these boys, I gave them opportunities to be directors, at least a half a dozen or more. And so their names are on the picture. And I never took credit for any direction on any pictures. But some pictures, I directed the whole picture. You take Movie Crazy. That I directed. The writer that we had on it had a little idea to drink a little too heavily. So we'd come in the morning. He was in no condition to drink, so we'd have to go let him lie down, and I'd take over. Finally, we let him go entirely. But I still give him credit on it. His name's on there, having directed. He was a very good gag man. He's with me for years. But so many of the boys, Sam Taylor, went out and... I don't think he was as good away from me as he was with me. He directed Mary and Douglas and Taming of the Shrew. He directed John Barrymore and Beatrice Lilly. He had some good subjects to work with. But, and Sam was probably one of the best men I ever had. He was a tremendous help to me. But I think when he got away and was completely on his own, he needed someone like myself that we kind of worked and teamed very well together.
Now, during the 20s, the film in the film industry, comedy was king, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, back in those days, remember, films were the kind of the mass entertainment. People went to films 3 and 4 times a week, even more. People now that probably say I haven't been to a film in 2 years. I'm not speaking of the young group. I think now it's the theaters are dependent mostly on the young adult, or the nostalgic group now, or probably stay and look at television or do some other things. One thing that we had, we're very happy to say, is we had what you call the gamut of we had the youngsters, the little kids, we had the students, we had the family, and we had the businessmen. They wanted to laugh. They wanted to get away from the cares of the day, their difficulties and complexities. So our comedies didn't have problems for them to work out, and they could sit in there and relax and get a chuckle or two, and they need a chuckle or two today, too, believe me, right now. But we're not going into that. We're still going to stay on the fun end.
How important were the glasses to Harold Lloyd?
Well, I can say this, that before I put on the glasses, I felt bound in. I was very much like a whole group of others. And I think Chaplin was by far the outstanding comedian with clothes that were on the broad side with the big shoes. And it wasn't until I put on the glasses that I felt a certain feeling of being free. I could do now what I wanted. I had my own individual character. You could feel that the romance now was legitimate. He could win the girl before you had to have a screwy character in order for you to win it, or else you had to be the losing lover. But also, with the glasses, you could recognize him as somebody you'd pass on the street, someone who lived around your neighborhood. You had to be very careful because I didn't want to lose the type of comedy I was making. As I said, with a character like this, being able to use him for slapstick. You had to be very careful in there. And one thing that I did do is that practically I very seldom went over the line and did something that was improbable or well, you didn't try to do cartoon type of comedy or anything of that kind. You kept it to the point of a certain probability. You may not believe it too much, but it was probable. If you looked at it, said it happened, yes, it could happen. So we kept it in that, like climbing the side of a building. And a person would have to have a tremendous lot of stamina to be up on that side of that building as long as I was, and all the things that happened to him. But you see him do it. It could happen, and that's where we kept it. So I think that the character that I did with the glasses in that way made me entirely individual. And as I say, Charlie, with his little tramp, he was individual completely, and so was Buster with his deadpan. And Laurel and Hardy could have been like the rest of the group, but they were so very talented and clever, and the team gelled so well together that they become very individual too.
Well, in the late 20s and the very early 30s, of course, along came the Talkies. Did the Talkies add anything to comedy, do you think, as far as films were concerned?
They should have. I don't believe they did. I don't think that it was the fault of the dialogue or the talking medium that did it. I think that a lot of the boys, their voices weren't suited to the characters they were playing, and I think that it slowed them up a little because they started working towards the dialogue, and they'd losing a little of the pantomime. Now, the first picture that I did the talking with, I'd already made it in silent, and then I felt that I'd missed the boat, so I went back and made it over. I made about 50% of it over. It was one of our most expensive pictures, but I still kept the same pace in a picture we call Welcome Danger. Need a little judicious cutting today, but still it's a very funny picture. But it had the same pace that our silence did. But the tendency was, because you could get your laughs much cheaper by having the spoken word than you could by thinking up these funny gag ideas. Comedy, they're very difficult to get. That's the reason you had these men. They're very difficult to get. And the spoken word's not nearly as hard. But the funny part is that people forget the spoken word, but somehow the action is indelibly imprinted on their mind. I've had people come up and picture made 15 years ago and just name one comedy action business after another. Never mention anything about the titles. They've forgotten that. And in the talking pictures, they think of your action, but they don't very seldom say, "Oh, what a funny title." And our picture's loaded with funny titles, and they were lots of funny lines. But no one comes up and said, "Oh, that was such a funny line you said." But they don't hesitate to say, "Were you getting hit over the head, and there was a bar there that they were hitting and not hitting your head?" Or where, gee, the monkey where he got the big shoes on and walked around there in the last picture. And that's where I think that our pictures today seem to hold up to the point that we didn't have a language barrier, and we kept our comedy basic, something that was just as funny in Tokyo as it would be in Paris or here in London or over in India, because we were taking things that happened to real people and their little characteristics, and we were twisting around and being funny. We weren't cruel in our comedies, but we made fun of characteristics and people and ideas, but in a nice, fun way.
Making fun and comedy. When the silent era came to an end, a lot of silent stars were no longer heard of. You're a legend, as I said at the very beginning, and we hear of you now. Did many of your friends just give up altogether and sort of fade away into obscurity?
No, I'm thinking around. They didn't. Charlie didn't want to go into talking pictures. He believed in the fact that silent pictures allowed you to use your own imagination. We drew certain lines and suggestions, and from there on you could carry on and make it one way you want, where talking defined it. You had to take it the way that they saw it. Now, I can think of a number of characters like John Gilbert. The voice didn't suit his tremendous romantic personality, and he was one of the big ones. But in comedy, now Buster had a heavy voice, but I don't think it spoiled his technique or his image. And I believe in some way, I think that Laurel and Hardy were enhanced by their comedy. I mean by their dialogue. And as I started to say and went off on another tangent, I don't think that the talking pictures is what stopped us from doing it. Maybe I better take my own self. But that time I had been doing very well monetarily with the pictures, and you get a certain opulence, and you get a little lazy, I think, and you didn't quite have that enthusiasm or that drive that maybe you had earlier.
Making comedy pictures, was it fun?
Yes, it was. It was hard work, it was a lot of effort, but it was fun. Because it was creating. It was never the same. Each picture had its own individuality, at least the ones as we went on, the more worthwhile ones. So the part that was not so much fun was trying to pull out of nothing comedy ideas. That's hard work. And I know the time when I first started with the glass character, I had to write it and direct and everything. That wasn't too much fun. It was too hard. You were just almost in nightmares trying to get business to put in. We couldn't afford gag men at that time. We had to dream up ourselves, director and so forth. And then finally you get a hold of somebody that could help you. But later on, they were great fun.
Over the last 20 years or so, have people tried to push you into doing pictures and offered you scripts and this type of thing?
Yes, it just happened all the time. But I'm the best man in the world to convince them that I'm not the right person for it. So whenever they come like that, instead of saying, no, I don't want to do it, I said, I don't think I could do that as well. And I think so-and-so would do that much better. And until finally some of them won't take that. And then finally say, well, I don't really want to do it. I said, I'm having too much fun doing other things. And it's a lot of work. And maybe I wouldn't be able to control it and do it as well as I did before. And I'd rather let your image ride just where it is. If I found a vehicle, even today, that would suit me, and I was thoroughly enthused, and I'd probably say, all right, let's go ahead and do it. That if I could have control over it. I know they wanted to do one of the biographical ones. This was Fox. And Wallace, Hal Wallace, a very fine director. He was bound he was going to make this. But I insisted on having complete control of the shooting script. They wanted to give me any of the early scripts, but I said, they're no good when you finally do the final shooting script. That's the one that counts. And another thing, who needs a biography? You better wait till you pass on, then they can make it.